The following episode contains dialogue intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised.
Previously on the diary.
Mr. Morgan has been found, and it turns out they didn't do a good enough sweep of his house the first time. The second time, they discovered Mr. Morgan chained to a chair that was bolted to the floor in his basement. They're saying he starved to death because there aren't any signs of torture besides him being bound to the chair.
I got to the cab. I couldn't see his face, but I could see his eyes in the rear-view mirror. He kept looking back at me. Every 30 seconds he would look again. I could tell if he was looking at my face or at my cleavage or at my skirt. It was the most uncomfortable ride I've ever been on. The taxi driver took me back to my house where I thought I was safe, but he came back 3 hours later. Then he climbed up the stairs and opened the door to my room. The first thing I saw was the dim shimmer of moonlight glaring off the silver barrel of the gun he was carrying. He had duct tape all around his head to cover his face. I tried as much as I could to slow him down. I slapped his hand and kicked him in the gut. I saw him squeezing on the trigger. I could tell the trigger was not moving at all. He had the safety on. That's when I went full spinning class on him and started kicking like crazy. He got it off and accidentally fired. I didn't trust him not to accidentally shoot me again, and I didn't move anymore. He didn't really finish what he started, but he definitely browsed through the deck and took with him the one card that goes between the U and the W.
He said that as a taxi driver, he gets to take little glimpses into other people's lives while they're in the back seat of his cab. He would start conversations with them, and they will either treat him like dirt or share. If they did share, they would either appear to be super self-centered, vain, and ungrateful, or they would just be plain boring and wasteful of time and life. He said that when he saw Fight Club, it was as if he was hearing his own thoughts through someone else's mouth. He's like a bully on steroids, just pushing your buttons until they get a reaction off you that gets you in trouble. At the end of the night, the police and local media arrived at the house. Everyone was accounted for, except for Craig, and Dorothy is giving us a ride in her car back to our town.
The following takes place on August 14th, 2015.
Dear Diary, I am sorry I abandoned you, but the last 2 weeks have been complicated. Remember I kidnapped Craig and then 3 days later my sister? Well, I have them both chained to the ground inside of Mr. Morgan's basement. Why? Several reasons. No one lives here, no one can hear them scream, and poetic revenge because that's what she did to him. I haven't been starving them the way she starved Mr. Morgan, though. I have been giving them only 1 meal a day. I am not their chef. I'm not cooking 3 meals daily. Now that they're underfed, they're more docile and easy to manage. So I started with Craig. During the last few days, I've been looking for a mountainy area that was secluded and high in elevation. I found a spot that had tall trees that weren't too close to each other. And then I spent several days building a contraption so that I could execute my revenge. I then had to wait for the perfect weather conditions, and today seemed to be ideal. So I knocked Craig out and took him to this place while he was unconscious. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was his reflection in a mirror that was on the ground. Behind him, nothing but the night sky. Then he realized he was actually resting on an old piece of gym equipment I found in a dumpster in an alley. His face was a few inches above the mirror, and because of the shape of the furniture, his hips were a little higher than his head and legs, bending at the waist. His hands and feet are actually touching the ground, and all 4 limbs are anchored to the grass by chains and metal stakes. He gave it a quick test tug. He can't move. The next thing he noticed was the cool breeze of the summer night on his bare skin. He is fully naked. Now, this he couldn't notice on his own, but there would be a powerful thunderstorm that night as predicted by the local weather channels. I had also built a makeshift lightning rod that I placed at the highest point of the tallest tree around. I do want to take a second here to explain what I did because contrary to popular belief, lightning rods don't attract lightning. They provide an easy way out for electrons to be discharged into the atmosphere, equalizing the charges, preventing a buildup, and diffusing any potential strikes. But the rod I built has a big metallic sphere at the tip that I made by taping 2 large IKEA bowls with electrical tape together, which generates the opposite effect. Charges up like a capacitor and creates a buildup of positive charges around the surface, which will then attract lightning. On the other end, the rod is actually just barely resting on the rim of Craig's butthole. The mirror was so that he could look at the cloud formation in the rain and so he could have the full experience. Before I explained to him what was going to happen, I tried to talk to him. You have somehow developed a lack of sensitivity towards other people's feelings. You're out of touch with reality. You no longer care about other people's existence as long as you get what you want. This isn't exactly targeted at women only, but I'm especially concerned about how you treat women. In particular, how you treated Jessica. You used her like she was a box of tissues. Would you care to explain why you did what you did to her? Why wouldn't I? See, this isn't one of those, how about you explain to me why I shouldn't have kind of conversations. I'm really not interested in changing your mind. I'm not doing this to reform you. All I want is to understand you. Think of me as a scientist, and you're my lab rat. Let's try this again. Why did you rape Jessica? Because I could. Oh, come on, Craig. You can do better than that. You were just telling me how Fight Club's main argument was so close to your own perspective. Clearly, there is more behind those blue peepers of yours than just because it was possible. Nope. Of course there is. Are you gonna tell me that your thought process was limited to I can, therefore I do, and then you stopped reasoning? That's stupid. You're like an animal reacting on instinct with no control over your actions. Humans are capable of so much more complex processing. Surely you must have considered other variables. At this moment, he took a few minutes to explain rather graphically how many different ways he would kill me once he gets his hands on me. I'm not going to go over everything he said here, but what was most interesting to me was how he started his monologue. Keep talking. You're just asking for... and then proceeded to enumerate his list of threats. I just waited for him to finish so that we could get back on the subject that mattered to me. Is that why you raped Jessica? Was she asking for it? Oh yeah, she was definitely asking for it. Really? How so? She begged me for it because she wanted it. She wanted it so bad. Did she now? Is that why you showed up with a loaded gun and your face covered in duct tape? Because she was so into you? Is that why she kicked you repeatedly in the gut because she so wanted you? She wanted it. She just didn't know it. Oh, that's convenient. You know more about what she wants than her. That's right. You should have seen the tight skirt she was wearing and the look she kept giving me in the mirror. She was looking for trouble. No. Now I am disappointed. Is that the basis of your argument? She dressed like a hooker, therefore she was asking for it? He didn't reply, and it was at this moment that it started to rain. No, she was not asking for it. The clothes a woman wears do not speak for her. She speaks for herself. Her fashion choice does not equal consent. OMG, you're so stupid. Do you have any idea the amount of thought I put into this revenge, only to find out you're nothing but a moron? You're just an idiot, an imbecile. You're not even worth my time. This is making me feel so angry. You women and your so-called verbal consent. It's useless, it's worthless, it's superfluous. Most animals have clearly defined mating habits, actions that the female of the species will do when they're in heat to inform the male that they're good to go. And humans aren't different. If you dress up a certain way when you're flaunting your sexual organs, that's a mating call right there. It's clear. It's well known. Her body was telling her to dress that way and go out at night because she was in heat. She was asking for it. You don't go to war without wearing the appropriate battle clothes. And if you choose not to wear, say, a helmet or a bulletproof vest to the battlefield, you're asking to be killed. Works the same way. Okay, I get it. That makes sense. Makes me feel much better that you said that. I was starting to think that you might not be a worthy adversary. I mean, I'm still going to go through with my plan, but this I can work with. I can tell you're going to appreciate what I planned for you, and it won't just whoosh over your head. You see, what you just said was all good and logical, but also lazy. You stopped reasoning when it was convenient for you. Let's pretend for a second that you are correct, that she was in heat, and that she was putting out a mating ritual dance with her clothes selection. This mating call does not necessarily have to be answered by you specifically. It is not meant to be answered by every man she walks by or looks funny at. Even if you're the only guy around, she still has the final say on who gets in and parties on. And that is where consent comes in. So I have designed this little contraption for you to teach you something about the importance of consent. You see, as of now, your bare ass is sticking out into the wind, and there is a powerful lightning rod attached to your rear end. And you know who's very attracted to metal? Lightning. One could almost say that you're asking for a lightning strike right now. Okay, fine. You might not necessarily want to be stricken by lightning, but you see, you're technically doing everything that someone that wants to be hit by lightning would do. And so the sky will look down at you and will see your signals. The clouds will get all aroused and polarized for you. They'll approach you from behind. It will gently rub back and forth, tearing the atmospheric atoms apart, ionizing them for you. It will thrust its electrons down through a long, warm, throbbing path of least resistance. And then the sky will discharge all its love onto your back and sodomize you in one powerful act of unrequested electrical coitus. He was silent. No response. He just stared into the mirror, looking at what he could see. I know that I angled his view so he could see the tree, and only after I told him all of this was he now able to distinguish the lightning rod from everything else. Now, the rain had started to pour down, but still no thunder. And trust me, I knew it didn't necessarily have to happen tonight, or maybe we could get some lightning but no direct strike on him. I didn't care. I would come back and do this again and again until I got lucky. He then started rocking sideways and back and forth, trying to liberate himself. Oh, no. I wouldn't do that if I were you. You're gonna get poked where you don't want to be poked. He stopped moving, possibly because he felt exactly what I said he would. There. Isn't it better not to fight it? Just relax and accept that it's going to happen. Isn't it exciting? What do you think it will feel like? I hope you like it. I'm sure the sky will feel so relieved after. But while we wait for the clouds to come, let me just explain to you something I think is important for you to hear. A woman's fashion choice is not asking for it. What a woman wears is her decision of what makes her feel comfortable or sexy or whatever, and not open to interpretation. You still need verbal consent from her that she wants the same thing you want. A woman wearing a skimpy skirt is not asking to be raped, any more than a black guy wearing a hoodie is asking to be shot at by the police or the neighborhood watch. A woman wearing low cleavage is not asking to be sexually assaulted, any more than a brown man wearing a turban is asking to be treated like a terrorist. Any woman dressed like a slut is not asking to be violated, any more than a white man wearing... What do white men wear that would intrinsically and inevitably cause him great and unjust misfortune just by wearing it? I can't think of anything. A romper, maybe? JK. No, but seriously, how about any more than a white man wearing a cassock and clerical collar is asking to be thought of as a pedophile? Or a white man wearing a blue suit and badge is asking to be treated like a dangerous racist? No, wait, those don't work the same way. Those are uniforms. You can't wake up tomorrow thinking you would like to wear them and then realize you accidentally wore them on the wrong day in front of the wrong crowd. And as I was thinking of other examples, I noticed I hadn't heard or seen a single drop of reaction from Craig since I told him what was going to happen to him. He had stopped moving. And then an unexpected intruder wandered into my crime scene. A single bee randomly buzzed in and sat on Craig's butt cheek.
I had a crazy dream, though. There was a bee buzzing around everywhere.
Is that a bee? He asked. I'm allergic to bees, he yelled. I just stared at him as he exponentially burst out in total fear and panic over the bee. It was so intriguing to me to see him admit to this weakness. Had this triggered some deep childhood memory that evolved through time into a phobia? Was this adding on top of the fear for being sky raped? Was this influenced by his lack of nutrition in the last weeks? Maybe all three of them? He scrolled through a wonderful repertoire of stages that was fascinating. I was amazed by every second of it, as if it made my revenge even more effective. First, he started threatening me again, with things he would do to me or to Jessica if I didn't make the bee go away or release him. When he got tired of that, he tried bargaining, trying to convince me to help him for a prize, win-win scenarios. When he got tired of that, he started crying and claiming he didn't want to die. He tried apologizing. He then chose to insult me, then back to apologizing, then claimed the apology was a lie and he would never surrender to me, then circle back to not meaning what he just said, etc., etc. He didn't even notice the bee had been gone for a long time and I didn't tell him. I was enjoying myself. Nothing he said even came close to changing my mind or hurting my feelings. Isn't this the perfect metaphor for this situation? The flowers and the bees. You're the flower, and the bee, well, the bee is just the bee. I really hope it doesn't do what we both know it will most definitely do because it's in the bee's instincts to do it. But you know what? Now that I think of it, the metaphor is really misleading and sexist, and we should stop telling it to children. First, women aren't flowers and men aren't bees. Those two are completely different species. Men and women are both members of the same species. Men aren't the only ones that can be working bees. Women can have the same social roles and deserve equal rights and treatment. Women's sole purpose is not just to sit pretty watching her life pass her by, just waiting for a man to pollinate her. This is so damaging! We should be using the example of the praying mantis. First, the female uses pheromones to lure the male in, and when one is brave enough to approach her, the male will engage in a courtship dance. If he's deemed worthy, he has now entered a lottery, where if the female has been previously food deprived, she will eat the head of her mate after sex. If she's well fed, he will live to see another day. But how could the male know this beforehand? There's no way, unless he first gets to know the female and figures out her eating habits. He is literally flipping a coin on whether he will be cannibalized after his one-night stand or not. So he better put in the work of getting to know her first. Of course, I'm kidding. This metaphor is probably more hurtful to little boys, what with all the sexual cannibalism and all. But at least it shows... My thought was interrupted by every hair on my skin standing on end, followed by a powerful blast of light and heat. The force of the blow pushed me back a couple of feet. When I came to, Craig was lying on the ground unconscious. The gym equipment he was resting on and the lightning rod had flown off to the side. His bum looked a little torched and smelled kind of badly, but for the most part, it looked like the electricity just went in where it was supposed to and out through his legs. It didn't go through his heart or brain. I checked his pulse and he was alive. I turned him over and compressed his chest a few times to make sure he was breathing. He'll be fine. If anything, he will now have a second phobia, some faint scarring on his skin, and possibly some pain if there is any permanent nerve damage. At this point, I unlocked his chains and walked away. I didn't call for help, and no one knows he's out there. When he wakes up, he will be a free man. He will have the opportunity to report me to the authorities if he chooses to. Or he will have to learn to live in silent despair with a hurtful secret, too ashamed to share it with anybody, forced to cope with the trauma one day at a time for the rest of his life, knowing that the person who did this to him is still out there, roaming the world, free of any consequences, able to do it again to someone else. Love, C.